Got it. All right. Okay. So welcome everyone to Word Up, the first Word Up of January of 2023. We acknowledge that we are in the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people, which include the Ottawa, Ojibwe, and the Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. We also acknowledge the Wendat Nation, Huron, who occupied these lands prior to the middle of the 17th century. We are dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture and recognize the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples in this land. We are committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and respect with all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. So welcome to Word Up's Publishers Panel. I'm sure most of you guys have already muted your mics. I think you just made up a word. Yeah. And then when we're ready to open the floor for questions, you're welcome to unmute and ask away then. So tonight, we are joined by Michael Callahan of Exile Editions and Michael Marola of Guernica Editions and Mirrorland Imprint. Now, both publishers are also authors and creative people. So I think we're going to get a kind of nice, interesting introspective from these guys. So we're going to ask a few panel questions before we open the floor to questions, and then we'll end with open mic. But before we go crazy, each of our panelists has 5 minutes to introduce themselves. So Michael Callahan, do you want to go first?
Sure. I actually run two publishing houses. We run the Books House Exile Editions, which began in 1975. And Exile Editions grew out of our literary quarterly, which began in 1972, Exile, a literary quarterly, now more commonly known as Exile. And in 2022, 2023, we're celebrating 50 years of publishing and about 3,000 contributions in our pages. The book publishing house, as I mentioned, grew out of the magazine. And we've now published over 500 books, and both houses are primarily literary in that we publish fiction, poetry, drama, nonfiction, some visual books, a nice breadth of interesting creative projects. Beyond that, we do have a submissions process, which we'll touch on later on, I'm sure, with some questions as to how to get published. We run a variety of literary competitions as well. And well, I guess that's a quick introduction for me. So I'll now turn it over to Michael Marola.
Yeah, I think I'll do something a little different, more of a personal introduction, because I think in the questions later on, a lot of the questions are about the publishers and the kind of publishing house that we have. So this is more about me and how I got to where I am today as a publisher. When I left, came back from UBC studying creative writing, one of the first programs in Canada, actually, that had a master's degree in creative writing in 1969. I went to work for a group of Montreal tabloids, Midnight Globe, and forget the other names, along with people like Max Layton, Irving Layton's son, who worked with us as well as a bunch of Vietnam War draft dodgers. The job application thing said, the little ad in the paper said, no poets, failed freelancers, or fly-by-nights need apply. That was the way they got you in there. That once I left there, I got a job in Nigeria teaching secondary school in Nigeria, math, English, French. That lasted for 2 years. Then I went to work as an editor at the Montreal Star and the Montreal Gazette. I also covered, during that period, I covered the punk rock scene in Montreal. I even paid to help one of the groups, a group called Genetic Control, to put out a 45 for them. So then I left the Montreal Gazette to start a freelance editing career. Constantly worried about failure for fear of not being able to get back to that tabloid job. And then I edited everything from lawyers' letters to PhD theses. And in many cases, the lawyers' letters were more complicated than the PhD theses. In 1992, we moved to Ontario, and I continued freelance editing. Then in 2010, the opportunity arose to take over Guernica Editions, a publishing house. The previous owner, Antonio D'Alfonso, who started the house in Montreal in 1978, because he felt that Italian-Canadian authors were not being heard, said that he had come to the end of his rope, and it was either sell or fold. And this over dinner at the house of the person who would become my Guernica partner, Connie McParlin. So we talked it over and decided to take the plunge. At the time, several people told us we were certifiable for taking on a traditional publishing house at a time when the new technologies were supposedly overrunning print. I guess we were too naive to heed those warnings. And here we are more than a decade later, still trying to make a go of it and still trying to avoid certification. In the meantime, and throughout all of this, I've tried not to lose focus on what I've wanted to do for my entire life, really, from when I was in grade school, and that's to write. So I've been fortunate to have been able to do this and to have had my poetry, short stories, novels, and plays published and or produced, some of them by Michael Callahan, many thanks, and proud of the fact all the published works have been with other publishers in Canada, in the US, and not through Guernica. And here's some blatant self-advertising. A symposium on my writing is scheduled to take place on May 21st in Toronto. But we're here tonight for the publishing end of things. So, and I stand ready to talk about that. Thank you.
Excellent. Michael Callahan. I'm only using last names because both your names are Michael. just to make things a little clearer.
Michael C. and Michael M.
Yeah. Okay, C. Is there anything you wanted to add to your intro about yourself or your personal creative work?
Sure. I guess hearing what Michael said a little bit of how I got into this too might be interesting. Michael had mentioned that when they took over Guernica from Antonio, it was probably with a lot of raised eyebrows. And the way I entered publishing was actually in 1992. My father had started both the houses in the 70s, and it was a traditional publishing house in that they used the University of Toronto Press. They had 25 people doing the old cut and paste mock-ups and everything of all the books and the magazines. And it had come to a point in the early 90s where the cost of doing traditional publishing was outstripping the ability of my father, Barrie, and the publishing houses to maintain any viability. So he had at that time been chatting with his author friend, Sean Virgo, at their house in Chinatown in Toronto. And I was over listening to the conversation, hearing how Barrie was struggling 20 years into this. Maybe it was time to give up on the publishing, get on with life and do some other things. And at that time, I had just recently graduated from university at York and was sort of in my interim period where I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. And so I mentioned to Barrie, why don't we take both exiles, into the digital world and get away from this old cut and paste, which I was very familiar with because part of my studies, one of my degrees at York was fine arts. And I did a lot of lithography and printmaking. So I understood this whole old school way of doing things. For whatever reasons, though, I had never touched a computer. I was of the generation that was just before computers really started to get integrated into high schools and into universities and colleges. So I was really a neophyte with computers, but figured whatever, I'll give it a go. Let's buy some computers and let's turn this publishing house around. And that's how I ended up getting into publishing. And 30 years, 32 years later, whatever it is, here I still am. And I continue to do all of the book design for Exile, both Exiles. I have designed every book and every magazine since 1990s. And that also grows out of my studying fine arts at York. By the way, my other degree was in philosophy, both, you know, on the route to high paying jobs. That's how I ended up in publishing. I'm also an artist. Linda had mentioned I'm a writer. I'm not a writer as Michael was a writer per se. I have a great writing ability, but I do not put it into works of fiction or poetry or things like that. But editorially, I do work with authors to hone their writing skills when it comes time to production. So I'm very hands-on that way in the publishing. Not only am I designing everything, I'm also running the publishing house. In 2006, my wife, Gabriella, came on board with us. So it's a really small family unit with my father. My mother's been the copy editor, proofreader for over 30 years after she left CBC. Gabriella runs all the back end of everything from accounts to, you know, the whole administration. Everything I can't do, she does. And everything that I and my wife can't do, Barrie picks up on the back end as the editor-in-chief. And so we're a really interesting small family dynamic, a small family unit. And that's essentially how small presses, I think, like ours can keep going. It makes it difficult to expand and get larger because, you know, the finances are limited, so to say. Yeah. But also I really enjoy running a small press because it has a lot of lateral freedoms in it. I can do things with the press that if we were a bigger press, I couldn't do. And, you know, my wife and I, the one thing that we really love about publishing is all the authors and all the people that we get to meet, especially through our public events, or now that we're all Zooming these past few years. It's the one positive aspect of publishing that outweighs everything else. It's just all the great people that we've met over the decades of having done this. As a caveat, unfortunately, I also recognize all the great people who we've lost over the decades. Sometimes we used to do a memorial page in the magazine, and then we started to feel like it was becoming a bit too much like an obituary every issue because so many great people come through our, as I said, over 3,000 contributions in the magazine, 500 books. That's thousands of people who we've come into contact with, and we're always happy to bring them on board, and we're always sad to say goodbye to them. Anyways, that gives you a little bit more background as to who I am as a person and how I got into this industry. And I guess either go back to Linda or over to the other Michael.
Yeah, we'll go back to me. So you've given us a great segue into our first panel question, which is what type of publishing house do you operate, and to tell us about it. So you've kind of given us a good idea. What would you add to that?
As I mentioned earlier, we're a literary press. Both houses are literary presses. The magazine itself has become much more of a visual magazine as well. So we now promote it as a literary and visual arts publication. I can say that what happened with the magazine a few years ago, because magazine publishing is far more difficult than book publishing. We were in a business model where we were trying to rely on advertising and subscriptions, and the amount of effort that goes into hustling people to put an ad in your magazine and to continue to renew your subscription was eating up so much of our time that we thought we have got to go a different route with this. This is crazy. We've tried this for decades. And it was actually Margaret Atwood who had suggested to us about 10 years ago that we look into becoming a charitable organization. And that's what we did in 2017, 2018. We became a charitable organization, and we now have donors who support the publication of the magazine. And we are basically a free subscription. Anyone who wants to read the magazine is more than welcome to come and sign up. The subscription continues. We do encourage people to donate to the charitable organization because the whole purpose behind this is an educational organization. And so the two houses, we always just look to see what we can publish. And as I said, you know, one is much more open to public dissemination, and the books house is a commercial house, remains a commercial house. Linda?
Yeah, that's great. And MM. Tell us about how you guys operate.
Guernica as well is mainly literary book publishing house. We publish poetry, short story collections, novels, plays, and literary nonfiction under the Guernica Editions imprint. We also have an imprint, Mirrorland, where we publish more commercial material and other genres like speculative fiction, memoir, creative nonfiction. We published a graphic novel. We published some mysteries under that imprint. And we were just introduced, we just announced a new imprint, 1366 books. 1366 is the date that Guernica, the village of Guernica, was born. Apparently, that's what they say is their birth date. So we call it 1366 books, which is starting in 2024 will feature 2 experimental fiction titles annually. This will be under the editorship of Stuart Ross. So these are all for Canadian authors, these imprints. We also have an imprint for non-Canadian authors, Guernica World Editions. While we offer the same traditional publishing services, the agreements for the Guernica World Editions are different, given that the titles that we publish under that imprint don't qualify for any of the usual arts grants or awards or anything else that the Canadian arts agencies give out for publishing Canadian authors. So it's a bit of a high wire act to try to get, and it's a bit sad when you think about it, because there is so much fantastic writing outside of Canada, English language writing, but as independent publishing houses in Canada, it is very difficult to publish these people because of the fact that we don't get anything from the government or from the agencies to publish these authors, and without those grants, it makes it very difficult to publish in Canada. So that's what we do. We published, I think, up to now, we're up to about 650 books, something of that sort. We publish 50 books, approximately 50 books a year. That includes all the imprints. That's it. Yeah.
So let's move on to the next question then. How should a writer know if their manuscript is ready for submission? Do you want to start that?
I can start that one.
Okay.
I suspect that our submission process is going to be different than what Michael will talk about, and it's different than, again, traditional publishing, where you have an open window for an author to make a submission to you, and then you have an editorial team that will review the submissions and go through it. That in many ways applies for the magazine. We do have on our website the submissions guidelines, how to submit your poetry, fiction, art, whatever it is. And we do that very simply because it's quite easier when we're looking at smaller pieces, smaller items that fill out a magazine that go in with our content. For the Books House, though, it's quite different. We generally do not have an open submission policy. Because we run literary competitions, one of them is a new fiction competition that just started this year, sponsored by Nona MacDonald Heslop. It's a $15,000 prize for the best short story written by a Canadian. This takes over for our Carter Cooper short fiction competition that ran for 10 years. That was sponsored by Gloria Vanderbilt and then her son, Anderson Cooper. After the 10-year run, we've evolved now into this new literary competition. We also run the Gwendolyn McEwen Poetry Competition, which has been going for, I think this is its 9th year now. The reason I mention these literary competitions, not only because we've managed to put over $125,000 into the pockets of Canadian writers over the past decade, but this is really where our main source of literary contact comes from. We'll receive hundreds of submissions to both competitions, and then we wean it down to the short list. And from the shortlist, we arrive at the winners, but always within those shortlists. Every year, we're finding 10, 15 authors who are really good at what they do, hence why they make the shortlist. And then so through this contact, we then follow up with them to see what they're working on. And so in this same approach, we publish a variety of anthology series. The main one going these days is the Exile Book of. It primarily has a speculative fiction or sci-fi fantasy bent. But through that anthology series and other open calls to other anthology series, we're again introduced to a huge body of writers. So every year we're publishing 2 or 3 anthologies. That's a group of about 60 writers that are introduced to us every year. Not to say that certain writers don't appear over the years and become familiar with us. But again, that becomes our pool of where we find our material from. There's another avenue that if editors come across a writer, then the editor can introduce that writer to us. And then we also, I just dropped my memory there. We also have another process that is just, as I said, the general open call. And so through the magazine, through this, through that, all these different avenues, that's how writers come to us with their manuscript. Getting to the point though of how is a manuscript ready for submission, we do tend to hope that established writers, be they emerging or established, that these writers have really good control of their technique and their talent, so that when it comes time to looking at a submission, we're not just going through what throughout the industry is considered a slush pile. And that's just a mountain of submissions by a lot of people who are just farming things out, hoping for the best. Exile also has a no multiple submissions policy. Now there are, this goes further into the next question about the agent's role and things like that, so I won't get into that at this point. But when we have submissions, we really discourage authors from doing multiple submissions, because if we find out down the road that we've had our editors invest their time in reading and evaluating a manuscript, only to find out that 6 other publishers are also reading and evaluating the manuscript at the same time, and then we go into this little dilemma of should we bother to pursue this author or not. We're very hesitant to have authors who are just eager to get published anywhere and who aren't really considering developing their career or their body of work with a certain publisher. Now, I can appreciate that, authors have to take opportunities, have to move between different houses to take advantage of whatever publishing opportunity there might be. But definitely within the world of Exile, we frown upon that. We like authors to stay with us. We like authors to build their career with us. We like to support those authors in the building of that career. We like to establish that relationship with them. So when the manuscript is submitted to us, we're expecting that it is a high quality manuscript. We expect that after that, we will put our full editorial forces behind it. And that through that process, that's how we develop our books. And unlike Guernica, as Michael said, they publish 50 books a year. We generally only publish 10 books a year. So we're much more refined in what it is we're doing. Few books of poetry, a couple books of nonfiction, a few anthologies a year, and 1 or 2 graphic books. So that's the submission process. Other than that, if you're going to submit your manuscript, really make sure that you've had a variety of people read it over. It's clean, it's well written, there aren't a bunch of typos in it. All of that is just a detractor to an author when they're presenting themselves to a publisher. We want to have great confidence in the work that we're considering, and that we really want to get behind the author when we do publish it. Linda?
Okay, that's a good answer. I think it gives us writers a feel for, your side of things. So Em, what's your take on this? How should a writer know their manuscript's ready?
Yeah, I'll be a little more, what's the word? Answer the question exactly the way it was asked, actually. And that's, how does a writer know if their manuscript is ready for submission? And they would know that it's ready for submission if they make sure that it's properly formatted, for one thing. It really upsets editors when the material is not properly formatted. According to the individual publisher submission requirements, using the right spacing, for example, and typeface for that is easy to read. That kind of very simple kind of things, and it should fit within the parameters of what a specific publisher is seeking in terms of length or genre, for example. We get manuscripts for cookbooks or things that if they just look at our website, they would know that this is not something that they should be sending to us. Aside from that, as Michael said, the manuscript should be as free as possible from typos and grammatical errors. That turns off right away. You say, oh well, this person has not really put the time into it to really be professional about it. So I think professionalism is very important when it comes to you want to get published. Well, this is what you have to do to be published, at least to get your foot in the door. Let's put it that way. Everything has to be within certain parameters. For individual publishers have different parameters. It's not always the same. So you check the publisher's website. One of the first things that an author should do to check for the formatting, to check for the types of material that publisher will accept, will even look at, that sort of thing. The vast majority of publishers these days request online submissions as opposed to through the mail. We still get manuscripts in the mail, and said, well, do you have electronic version of this? Because we don't accept submissions through mail anymore. It doesn't make any sense. If we want to send out something to an editor, for example, then it means we have to input that material, and it's just not worth it. Also, the author, the writer, should submit the material either as a Word document or as a PDF document. Those are the two that we accept, that we'll look at. Eventually, if we accept a manuscript, then we ask for the Word document, naturally, because you can't really fool around with a PDF document. You can't edit. You can, but it's not what you really want to do. So yeah, I think that's what an author, a writer, should be looking at if they're trying to decide whether a manuscript is ready to be submitted or not. No matter to which publisher they submit it, it's we have our own. We have a submissions period, but I think all publishers probably agree to the list that I just gave for what a writer should be looking at before they submit. Right. So.
Yeah, and let's follow up briefly on that. Speaking of what Michael was saying about electronic submissions, for the magazine, we use Submittable, the online portal for submitting. And I think there's a basic $5 charge to submit a piece to that. That just goes towards the editor to give them a little bit of money for the time that they're investing in reviewing and things. But it's exactly that. We encourage PDFs, Word files. We still do the old mail thing. Once in a while, we'll accept a manuscript by print. Not too often does that happen anymore, though. So yes, really what Michael said, formatting and paying attention to the publisher's requirements are very important. And just one other thing that I forgot to mention when I was talking about how we work with authors is we also run a mentoring program. So when authors are introduced to us and we find a manuscript that is really well written, but requires maybe 50 hours of work with a serious established writer, and we've had people like Al Moritz, the poet Al Moritz, poet laureate of Toronto. Ann Michaels is another one of our mentors, my father, and Bruce Meyer, who I see has left his post at the moment. He's one of our mentors as well. And through that program, which is sponsored by BMO, we take a manuscript that we feel is ready to be published, needs the honing of this serious editor, with the intention that that book gets published. And that is another venue that if we see a manuscript and we feel it's worth working with a mentor, we invest that mentor's time into the author and then produce the book at the end. And over the past 3 years, we have 10 books that have successfully made its way through our mentoring program, as opposed to a lot of mentoring programs which just mentor the writer and say, okay, now get out there in the big world and figure out where to get published. Linda?
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I think mentoring can probably push a writer who's just on the cusp of being there, get them where they need to be. So the next question, I think, is something that confuses especially a lot of people who are new to submitting their work. So what is the publisher's role and what is the agent's role? And do you guys work with agents? And does a writer even need an agent?
Michael, you want to start?
Sure. The publisher's role differs depending on the size of the publishing house, I think. And when we're talking about a small independent publisher, the publisher's role consists in finding and publishing writing that might not otherwise be published. There are always stories going around about how the large publishing houses won't accept a manuscript until their marketing people have told them, that it can sell a certain quantity, make back its money and some. So, but Canadian independent publishers have, I guess, a duty, to bring material into the public sphere that contributes to the culture in some way or other. And, quite often this means paying attention to manuscripts by those who would normally be described as being on the margins or voices that aren't often heard in the mainstream. But the bottom line is for a publisher to bring out the best possible writing. And, a publisher, no matter what size, needs a business plan. But if the survival of independent publishers depended on sales alone, no one would exist. Not one independent Canadian publisher would exist in Canada. So the role of independent publishers differs quite a bit from that of, let's say, HarperCollins or one of the majors. It's more like you've got a business plan, you want to survive, but you're not out there. You're not out there to make money. There's no way that does and we would not survive. And I say this quite often without the Canadian arts agencies as independent publishers. That is, they are key to the continued success of publishers in Canada. And the argument that some people argue, well, the business plan is a failure if you're not making money. But in this case, as I said, we're out there to bring something to Canadian culture, and that it doesn't necessarily mean money. Although Canadian independent publishers put a lot of money into the economy. I mean, we go to the house here in Toronto, and every year, and to try to convince the MPPs or MMPs, whatever they call them, to support Canadian independent publishers to get our books into schools, for example, which they'd rather put Hunger Games or something like that in our schools rather than Canadian published material. Sometimes they'll put in material written by Canadians but published in Britain or the US. So that part of the role is to try to get the government to pay more attention to us as independent publishers, because we are important to the culture of the country. So the agent's role, it's in Canada, like elsewhere, I guess, the agent's role consists in getting the best possible contract for their clients. That seems to be the thing. But the thing about that is that most Canadian publishing houses, they don't really require a writer to have an agent. We accept material directly from authors, from writers. We don't say to them, no, you need to have an agent before you can come to us. We've worked with agents, rarely. I mean, part of the reason for that, part of the rarely part of things is that the agents don't feel that in many cases that we can provide their authors with enough royalty payments, I guess, to make it worthwhile for the agent to bring this author on. So in Canada, agents, an author can try to get an agent, and but they're not necessary for us.
Okay, I can follow up on a couple points that Michael made there. As he said, small presses play a very important role, and certainly a pivotal role in many emerging or young, I don't mean young by age, but young into the industry writers. And that's one thing at Exile that we've always done, be it in the magazine or the book house, is we like to see ourselves as a launching pad for the emerging writer, because they generally will not get picked up by a big house because they have no track record, no proven viability in terms of why would, say, Penguin Random House want to take a first-time published author. They're looking for the authors that are established and are going to make them money. And otherwise, boy, would I have ever liked to have had Harry's memoir. 1.5 million copies in the first day. That ain't small press publishing, fortunately. Now, what I mentioned earlier, I talked about how we like to build the careers of authors or participate in that building of a career. That's exactly what I was talking about. When an author comes to us, or we discover an author with their first book, we publish it. We then try to get the second book out, the third book out. Not all writers, as I've come to realize over the past decades, even have it within them a second book, and so it is a little discouraging for a publisher after they've gone through this material, found this talent, published that work, to realize that they are never going to write another book again. They wrote their stories about their life, and that's about the end of it. It's a risk we take as small presses. We're trying to discover those little nuggets of gold in the pile of coal that's out there that comes our way. And when we can support these emerging talents or mid-career talents, we do our best to do that. And the other thing that I need to mention is, even when you make it as a mid-career writer, or even as an established writer, it doesn't necessarily mean that you all of a sudden jump to a big house, or if you have jumped to a big house, that you're going to stay with that big house. So, for example, Austin Clarke, when he was an emerging writer here in Canada, he published with Exile Editions and in the magazine. He went on to the bigger houses, won his few awards. Where did he publish his final books with? Exile Editions, because he had gone through that cycle of, he could make the publishing house money, they could take advantage of his presence within the literary community at that time. As soon as that passed for the publishing house, he's left without a publisher again. And so that again goes to the building of a body of work, and being there as a supportive part in a writer's whole life. As for agents, we're the same as Michael said with Guernica. Agents can approach us. We tend to publish, most authors have no agent. One thing that we have seen occur over the past 5-7 years is the more and more that the creative writing programs across the country, I don't want to say churn out new writers, but really they're churning out new writers at an incredible pace and sending them out there into the world, thinking that they're ready for publication, that everything they're doing is brilliant, and they immediately go and get an agent. And so when an emerging writer, or a writer who only has 1 book, 2 books under their belt, gets an agent, it sort of signals something to Exile or me as a publisher. Why does this person have an agent? They have no track record to be agenting. Why is the agent trying to get a bigger price from a publisher? And this goes back to the no multiple submissions policy we have. We just, we just received a book from a woman that we published last year, launched her book, and all of a sudden she sends the new book, but instead of sending us the book first, the agent has sent it out to multiple publishers. This goes to what Michael was saying. The agent is interested in making money, and they have to support their own career as an agent. They need to have enough authors, and they need to be farming out enough material to make enough money for their business. And so we find, as soon as an agent gets involved in a young writer's career or an emerging writer's career, that's a flag for us to be very wary of that author, because really that author has gone, as far as we're concerned, to a step that they should be taking later on in their career when they're actually agentable. They have a talent, they have a track record, they have a body of work that is sellable. And in that way, this goes to what I said when we work with a writer. There was a Mexican Canadian by the name of Marta Batiz. We published her first 3 books. They were all great. And then Anansi picked her up. And why did Anansi pick her up? Because after the 3rd book, she felt she was approached by an agent who was familiar with her career and said, listen, I think that you're at the point now where I can actually do something to help your career. And as much as it's disappointing to us Exile to lose great talent like that, we're always supportive of these authors when they move on to the bigger house. And certainly there's no way that Exile Editions or Guernica or whoever is a small press that we can ever compete with the advances that big presses offer. But going back to what I said about Austin Clarke, you go that route and it depends where you take it, and then you end up. So agents can play a beneficial role in an established writer or a mid-career writer's career. I'm hesitant, though, as I said, when it's an emerging writer who picks up an agent, and then that agent is out there soliciting all over the place, looking to squeeze an extra $100 out of something or other. So that's my take on publishers and agents.
Okay. So the next question, you guys have partially answered already. So where do you find most of your authors? So unsolicited queries, I think we've kind of got an answer to that one, but conferences and workshops, or is there anything else that, you know, to give us an idea of how to like stalk you guys?
Well, as I said, you know, most of what we do, we try to find people from the submissions that come our way naturally. So if you're interested in publishing with Exile Editions, you should really be paying attention to our open calls. Submit your stories if you're a story writer to our anthologies. Submit your stories to the magazine. Introduce yourself to us personally through your writing, and that's the way to open the door with us.
Yeah. We have a set submissions period where, you know, anybody can send in, and we ask that they send in the full manuscript, a synopsis, and a brief bio. And then, you know, this year, that submissions period is actually the month of February. That's it. That's when it's open. And then, you know, once it closes, then we start looking at the material, and we probably get back to the authors, and we try. This is the one thing that we respond to every single author that sends us submissions. And last year we got more than 250 submissions. So, you know, we try to respond. We do respond. I respond when they first send in something. I say, thank you very much. We'll get back to you in May, the end of May. And then once we go through them, then I send them a note saying, you know, thank you. You made it very close, but you didn't make the final 5 or whatever. You know, so everyone gets a response from us, and I feel good about that, because as a writer myself, the one thing I really, really hate is when I send something out to a publisher and it's like sending it out to some place on the planet Pluto or something. There's never a response. They never get back to you, you know, and that really, to me, is a sign of real disrespect for authors. So I have the experience of being an author and an editor and a publisher. So, you know, I've had all of those, and to me, it seems that you should treat even the authors that you know you're not going to publish, at least with some respect, and let them know that, okay, you know, thank you very much, but this is not for us. It's not going to work. So yeah, we get all our authors that way. No, once in a while, once every year, one author perhaps, an agent will send us an author, and you know, we'll look over, and you know, so we published a couple of authors that way, but not very many. So yeah, Linda.
Yeah, I just want to follow up what Michael said there. We're the same. We make sure that unless something falls through the cracks, which it occasionally does, we always respond to every author for exactly the reasons that Michael said. It's a matter of respect. And what's interesting is my father mentions, I don't know, 5 or 6 times a year, the fact that writers will respond back to him to thank him for actually having taken the time to handwrite a little letter of rejection. And that handwritten personal rejection is more important to them than being left in the void out in Pluto, as Michael said. No one wants to be in Pluto wondering where their writing went and why no one cares about it. So anyways.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, I know. That's experience I'm probably sure most of us have had. So that brings us to what are the most common mistakes authors make in querying? How important is the synopsis and query letters to you guys? And should a writer throw the towel in after several unsuccessful queries?
Oh God.
Because we feel
Michael,
like
you're the writer. You can start with this one.
Okay. Yeah. Actually, I've done workshops on how to query. So there are a bunch of mistakes that authors can make. But what I did in one of the workshops is I put together a query letter that embodies just about every error that a writer can make when writing a query, and that's it's exaggerated. It's an exaggerated letter, of course, but I admit that. But here it is. Here it is. To whom it may concern. First of all, if I get an email, from a writer and the first thing is to whom it may concern, that's the last thing I read on that thing. That's the last. I eliminate that right away. Anyway, to whom to whom it may concern. I've been writing for 40 years, and I think I'm ready to get something published. So I'm going to make you the lucky publisher who will publish my first fiction novel. The idea for this fiction novel came to me the other day when I was on the second par 3. It was like, eureka, this is a genius idea. But don't think that golfing is my only hobby. I also like to fly kites, and that too helps me work out ideas for my fiction novels. It's like flying high, There I am standing out in the field, letting out the string, and the ideas just flow. So that's where the rest of my fiction novel comes from. People often ask me, so is there another novel like yours? And in all honesty, and I'm not tooting my own horn, I don't think there is another novel out there just like mine. Another huge mistake. The one thing, the thing you should do in a query letter is to actually give, 2 or 3 other novels that might resemble yours or might be, close to what you're trying to do. My fiction novel is totally unique. It's like it'll put that guy, that Irish guy, Joyce, in the shade. So what do you say? What do you say? I've only written the first couple of sentences so far, but I'm sure I can finish my fiction novel in the next 5 years or so. Heck, that's not such a long time, is it? I mean, didn't it take that fellow Joyce 17 years to write his novel? And that other fellow, Marola, the word is it took him 26 years to finish his fiction novel. Let me know soon. I'm quite busy. I want to get going on my next fiction novel. P.S. If this fiction novel doesn't interest you, not to worry. I've got a whole bunch more in my desk drawer. Like I said, I've been at this for 40 years. P.P.S. I got a birdie on that par 3. That to me is a good omen, don't you think? Yours writerly, looking for a hole in one. So that query letter just has just about every error that someone can make writing a query letter. And, a query letter should be very sharp. You say exactly what your work is about, the number of words in it, that what it resembles or what it doesn't resemble, what's unique, and what fits, why it should fit your particular publishing house. I mean, that's it's important. Having said that, for Guernica, queries are not all that important because during our submissions period, we request a synopsis, an author bio, and a complete manuscript. We don't really ask for a query letter first. So that takes out the query letter. We get the complete manuscripts, and that makes sense for us because we're not really negotiating with someone to write some type of nonfiction piece, which sometimes you can just come in with an outline or just some chapter headings with little chapter blurbs in it, that sort of thing. But no, we look for a complete manuscript. So queries aren't for us. And the last part of the question was, do you throw in the towel after a couple of unsuccessful queries? No way, no way, man. I like to tell the story of the day I gathered several hundred rejection letters, which made me feel kind of rejected myself. So I placed them in a metal barrel in the backyard and set them on fire. And then I sent out another query. So don't ever give up after a couple of queries. That would be, as a writer, one of the things you need is diligence, a lot of control, and also you have to just be willing to just stick it out, just keep on going. I mean, part of being a writer is you have to have it in you. And you know, that part of it is very important as a writer. If you want to be I've done hack work. Okay, I've like I said, my career started as a tabloid writer, and what we did there, that's where I learned some of my fiction skills. Actually, in the morning, the editor would come in and give me a photo of something, and I would write the story of that, and that would appear in one of the tabloids. We'd make up a story with a picture. So, you know, you got to keep on going and keep on going. That's the only way you can survive.
Yeah, Michael's quite right in that. Whether it's your expected profession or your passion, you just keep on writing and you keep on submitting, and you hope that you hit that goal at some point, that a publisher sees the work for what it is. And the other thing is, it just may be the wrong year, the wrong time, whatever. Your manuscript might be brilliant, but in that particular year, it just didn't register with the submissions editor who is reading it. And that's why, you know, if it goes out, again, why we have that no submissions policy, you send it to us, even if it's rejected, put it out to another publisher, you know, wallpaper your kitchen with the rejection letters, whatever it is you do, burn them in your barrel, like Michael said. But that's part of the process. You have to work your way through it. And you know, whether you're a visual artist and you get declined by galleries to show your work, you finally get a gallery that takes you, or in the publishing industry, you'll finally get a publisher who picks you up. And that again goes back to what I said about the importance of trying to build a body of work with a particular publisher, so that you can establish that relationship with them and you feel you have some security moving forward. I can't really speak to submission letters because, as I said, we don't go that route, or query letters, other than, like Michael said, make sure you take out all that peripheral stuff. Just make your letter, say what it has to say, get your point across, talk about your manuscript, put it out there and hope it does the best. And then I think that's about as much as I can speak to in terms of letters and that part of the submissions process.
Okay, well, thank you for that, guys. Yeah, I think querying letters are probably one of the most frustrating things for writers. I'm pretty sure it feels like it takes you as long as it does to write a book sometimes, just to nail it down. So
yeah,
so
I have a template for it. Yeah. I mean, you know, it's not easy, but there's a formula for it. There's a formula for the query letters that someone can use. It's you know, but yeah.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, there are a few out there. That's kind of what I follow, but it feels like trends change, or that they want different things from time to time. So it feels like, you know, before I want to send out another query, I feel like I need to go research it again just to see if there's anything new. So it's interesting that you don't need them. You rely on the synopsis and the manuscript itself. So I like
well, that's
that.
true. Why send out a query when you could just send out the manuscript? And if Michael has an open period in February, or like we do, we're open 12 months. We don't care when the submission comes in, they just roll in and we roll with them. Just follow that and that's it.
Okay, that's great. So that brings us to the next question. What contract or legal issues are there that writers should be wary of when they do find a publisher? I think there's a lot of terminology that we don't understand, you know, like rights and different kinds of rights, and maybe you guys can speak to that. Who wants to go first?
I can go first. Yeah. I can go first by saying that with Guernica, there are no contract or legal issues because it's the agreements are very straightforward. You know, but there have been stories of authors who were suddenly hit with hidden costs in order to have their books published, or facing demands that they purchase several hundred copies of a book as part of the deal, as part of that thing. There's nothing wrong with an author buying several hundred copies of their book as long as it's voluntary. In fact, if an author is a good salesperson, the profit made from selling one's own books is a great deal higher than the average royalty one gets from the sale of a book. You know, for example, if an author has signed an agreement where they get 10% of the cover price, which is a pretty standard agreement here in Canada. It's not less standard in the US, where it's usually 10% of the net, which means the money that the publisher actually gets from the sale of a book, which can be, you know, 50% less than the actual cost of the book. But in Canada, most times it's 10% of the cover price, which is a good deal because quite often a book is sold for less than the cover price. And say that if the cover price of a book is $20, then the author would get $2, right, on that as a royalty. If the author buys a bunch of their own books, which they usually you can purchase at a 40% reduction on the cover price, they can make back that 40% if they sell the book at $20. Then the author would get, that's an $8 on each book that they sell at $20. So it's not hard to make the math, but that means that the author has to go out there and sell their own books at readings or, you know, whatever. Poets are usually better at this than fiction writers, mostly because they have more readings, more poetry readings available to them. And also, you know, for some reason, people who love poetry tend to buy more books at these readings. For when it comes to rights, the way it works, the way we work it, I mean, the way we work it is that the author has the rights to the manuscript. That's the author's rights. We have the rights as long as during the contract to the actual book, because that book was produced by Guernica. That book, the actual you know, the typesetting, the cover design, and all that. So what that means basically is that an author cannot then take that and go to another publisher and use that for the starting off of once the rights have ended with us. Okay, usually our contracts are 5 to 7 years. So, you know, when the rights end with us, they can't take that PDF. They can't take that cover and go to another publisher and give it to them to produce another book. They have to start from the beginning with, you know. So that's why we have the copyright, where we actually say in the contract, the copyright to the material is the author's. The copyright to the book is Guernica's during the period of the agreement. There are some subsidiary rights, like translation rights, for example. But very straightforward. You know, it's 50-50 translation rights. Let's say one of our books is taken by translated into French for Quebec sales, for example. First, there's a deal. We have to make a deal with the copyright holder, which would be us in this case, and then we make a deal with the translator, and we get 50% of any copyright payment to pay for the rights to use that translation. As I say, pretty straightforward. We don't have any hidden clauses in our contracts. So
we're the same in that sense. Exile, it's a straightforward, it's a long contract coming in at about 15 pages, but really that 15 pages is just boilerplate. It protects the author's rights, it protects the publisher's rights, in terms of to make sure there's no plagiarism in a book, or there's no recipes for bombs and things like that, just to make sure that everyone's secure in what we're publishing. And the same thing with royalties. We offer now 15% to our authors, for the same reason Michael said, 10% is great at $2 a book or $2.50 a book, but we thought that that's not quite enough. So we've increased our royalties to 15%. Otherwise, there are no hidden clauses in our publishing contracts. It's all straightforward. If you do feel that there is something sketchy in your contract, and hiring a lawyer can be cost prohibitive because you haven't even signed the deal yet and you're looking it over. So it's really just be due diligence to read through the contract, make sure you understand things. Whatever you don't understand, it's completely well within your rights to ask the publisher, what does this mean? Why is this here? And you can have clauses struck from the contract. It's just requires your initial and the publisher's initial. So if there is something contentious in it that you don't agree to, strike it out or have it reworded in your benefit, whatever it is that you need to do. Just simply take it from a point of view that this is a contract that's supposed to give you your rights and not give all the rights to the publisher. That's it. And one final thing about the terms of agreement, we keep our book in print all the way back to 1972. And the reason we do this is back in 2006, when we were repped by MacArthur and Company before they went bankrupt, and we were warehoused at HarperCollins in Toronto. Because MacArthur and Company, who was repping us, was paying all the warehousing fees, we didn't really know what was going on until they went out of business. And then HarperCollins called me up and said, well, you're looking at about $3,000 a month to warehouse your books here. And I thought, holy smokes, I can't give you guys $36,000 a year just to keep some boxes of dusty old books alive. Because I'm also into renovations and construction and things like that, I thought this is just crazy. I'm going to build myself a warehouse. And I set myself to the task over 6 weeks of building a warehouse that now stores 50,000 books on my property here out in rural Holstein. And the benefit of this is I invested about $8,000 to build this warehouse, put in my own time and effort, but we now have at least 420 out of the 500 plus books that we have published remain viable, remain in print. They're all available on our website. We get orders all day long, every day long for all of this backlist because we've done international writers, we've done American writers, we do primarily Canadian writers. But that's, I think, what's one of the saddest things for me as a publisher, and because I'm a designer, I'm designing the catalogs, I'm designing the magazines, these things become templates, and I'm constantly deleting authors' photos, authors' bios from these catalogs that I have to reproduce or produce every 6 months. I'm constantly in our contributors pages of the magazine. Goodbye, Michael Marola, goodbye, Darlene Madot, goodbye this, because I have to now add in a new person. And that struck me as one of the most, if I was a writer, that would be one of the most debilitating and discouraging things to me, is to know that my book was only around for 1,000 days. Because most publishers have a clause that if the book is not sell or falls under a certain threshold of sales, it goes immediately to pulp. And I can say that the majority of books generally after 3 years do not meet that threshold. And so the idea that everybody I publish in 3 years from now, I'm going to go and pulp all their books by driving them to the local dump just seems really awful to me. And so that's Exile's commitment to the writer, is to make sure that their book stays around forever, if we can make it that way, and anyone can enjoy it at any point in the future. So. Right.
I was going to mention about
Linda?
the contract problems. If somebody has problems with contract, if you're a member of the writers union, they do have someone there that you can in fact, I think even if you're not a member of the writers union, I think there might be a fee, might be a small fee, but you can have your contract vetted by someone by a lawyer that works with the writers union. So
that's right. I'm familiar with that.
Yeah. All right.
That's great. Okay, so one more question before we open it up to the floor. It's probably a fairly simple one. So, what is a vanity publisher, and do you have any advice for writers in regard to them? I know I've been approached by a few over the years.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
Michael, yeah, sure.
All right. Yeah, well, I think vanity publishing pretty much explains itself. It's self-explanatory. It's when it's self-publishing basically is what it is. And however, I'm not like completely against vanity press or self-publishing or hybrid publishing as one of the things they call it there. That because I think they're okay if you know exactly what you're getting into when you do this, right? I mean, aside from there not being an editorial control valve to hold back absolute garbage, meaning that the author has to be his or her own editor in this case. The major problem with the vanity publishing and self-publishing is a lack of distribution. That's you don't get any distribution because the reason this translates into the printing of only a certain number of books, usually the number of books paid for by the author. So if you're writing a memoir for your family and friends, for example, maybe the extended Facebook friends as well, then yeah, sure, yeah, if you want to, if you have the money, then go into self-publishing. I mean, there have been some famous people who started with the vanity press because nobody wanted to publish their works, but nowadays, I mean, that's not quite the same. Otherwise, the lack of distribution will mean that your book won't get out to it won't even have a chance to getting out to a wider public. Hybrid publishing, does admit to some distribution, but there's the problem of lack of quality control when it comes to editing, cover design, typesetting. Not to mention lack of publicity and promotion. I mean, you're just not going to get it. And an author ends up paying, from what I've seen on some of these, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 without getting any of the traditional publishing benefits. So it's very that kind of publishing is good for very narrow band of people. Someone with a lot of money who wants to most likely publish a memoir of some kind of family memoir or something of that sort. But if somebody wants to be a writer and wants the world to get to see their material, that's not the way to go.
Well, I'm gonna agree with Michael on various aspects of what he said with vanity publishing. However, Exile is a hybrid publisher. We are not shameful of it. We don't discourage it. But speaking to what Michael said about the pitfalls of hybrid or vanity publishing, we will not accept a book that does not meet our editorial expectations. So let me just frame it this way. There is a writer, and this goes back to your pitch letter, you're sending out your rejections. We came to realize over the decades that there are writers out there who have really good books, but for whatever reason, they're not getting picked up because they're not appealing to whichever publisher they're sending them out to. And these are writers who also don't really want to go the route of the rejection letter. They know they've got a good book, but they just aren't finding the market for it. And so if they enter into an agreement with Exile, they get all of the distribution that Michael was talking about. They get all of the promotion that Michael was talking about. They get cataloged. They get treated as if it was any other Exile Editions book. And so they get the full benefit of all of our services, including editorial. simply what vanity or hybrid publishing allows these types of authors to do is to bypass the submission and rejection process. And that said, as I mentioned, if we don't believe in the integrity of the book, it doesn't matter how much money that author is waving in my face, because that holds the integrity of Exile Editions hostage. And money can never be the deciding factor in what it is we're publishing. Quality has to be the deciding factor and the determining factor in what we're publishing. Now, one of the reasons that we moved into this form of hybrid publishing is over the years, I've just really gotten tired of dealing with the arts councils. And Michael touched on this earlier, that most Canadian publishing, especially small independent press publishing, cannot survive without the financial support of an arts council or a variety of arts councils or public bodies. To be honest with you, after decades of writing these applications and going through the grinding mill, the meat grinder of having to deal with these people and, you know, fight for every nickel that they're willing to or not willing to give me, we made the decision a couple of years ago that these programs had become so skewed in their mandates that this was really restricting and inhibiting us from publishing what we wanted to publish. And we thought that, okay, well, if we can make money through vanity publishing, but still maintain our integrity, why not get the money generated that way instead of having to deal with a public body who's endlessly raking me over the coals because I didn't meet this, I didn't do that, I didn't publish enough of this group, I didn't publish enough of that group. The endless, you know, list of checkboxes that publishers are required to tick off every time they make an application, not to mention that the application process is grinding in and of itself. And I also thought the application to those is crazy because they only give you limited funding. And that doesn't, it's not forward momentum. It's every year you get your sum, and then you have to go back into the process of writing an application just to get a nickel to pay for the books. And I thought I would rather deal with authors, and I agree that certainly there are authors who are limited by their financial background, but I'd rather deal with authors who have an interest in their book, interest in seeing their book get published, know that Exile Editions is willing to put in the commitment of our editorial services and all of our publishing services to get that book out there, because I want to make money off the book. The author wants to make money off the book. I want to help build that career. I want to launch their career, whatever it is. And therefore, we do offer that program. Now, Michael had mentioned international authors previously, and this is one thing that international authors find very appealing with us. We just released a book of Croatian fairy tales in translation. Now, this is a woman who's a professor emeritus at Western Michigan University. She has her own finances, she has backing. Where is she going to find a publisher to pick up Croatian fairy tales in translation with illustrations by a Croatian artist? Well, Exile. So we worked with her on the honing of the translations, because we have an incredible editorial staff. And she was able to put up the money as an American to get published through a Canadian to bring out this work in Croatian, a bilingual book, fully illustrated in color. And Michael's right, yeah, it costs about $5,000, $6,000 US, but that goes to cover the printing and the whole editorial services to pay for the thing. And this book gets out there. Why did she come to Exile? Because we have a history of publishing European authors. We've published Mihalic and Parun and other Croatian writers in the past. And so here is an author who, out of all the publishers in North America, zeroed in on Exile because of our commitment to also European writers. And she thought, okay, I can become a part of that body of their work, and through their website, be allocated into that European framework. People who are looking for that type of stuff, be it for a course adoption or just simply because they're interested in that type of literature, it all gets bundled in. And so she saw the investment in this. And because she had other foundations, or the University of Michigan also supported the program, she was able to put together the money to bring this book forward, which otherwise it never would have seen the light of day. And this follows on her translations of 2 other books as well. And so these books are getting picked up, they're getting reviewed really well, they're going on to course loads. And so this woman, for her upfront investment, is reaping the benefits of having done vanity publishing, except done it in a serious way with a serious publisher who is looking at the respectful nature of putting this book out there, and not just to make a buck, because I need to make a buck. So that's our take on vanity, or as Michael said, and I agree, we are hybrid publishers, and we do it with purpose and prestige.
I think, I think you have to differentiate between hybrid publishing and the vanity press, the self-publishing press, right? It's different. The thing about you might also be a little unique in terms of the your hybrid publishing, because you have to. I've been told horror stories of people who've answered, responded to. There's a whole bunch of hybrid publishers out there right now. They're all over the place, right? Very, very dangerous kind of stuff. They want the money up front, and then some people never even heard back from them, that sort of thing. What you do, I think, is you take your traditional publishing abilities and framework, and bring in the hybrid publishing. That's a little different than your straightforward hybrid publisher. That's, I think, is makes you different. I've
always discouraged that type of vanity publishing, because whether it's at trade shows or events or whatever, and I talk to these people who are, should I self-publish? Should I do this? And it's like, do you really want to spend the next 2 years selling your books out of the back of your car? And out of your basement or out of your garage? Because that's where self-publishing through that type of vanity publishing will take you. It really is just your own vain ego that makes you want to do it that way. And where do you go? You got 50 boxes in your basement, and what good is that? You're selling a book here and a book there. So thank you, Michael, for pointing that out, that yes, we're a little bit different. And because we put our history and our heritage and our credibility behind what we do in the publishing of vanity books, that at least gives the author the assuredness and the guarantee that they're going to get something. And to what Michael said, we don't look for the money up front. We enter into a negotiation with these types of authors. We probably publish 2 books a year this way, 3 books at the most. But we enter into a contractual obligation where everything is laid out quite clear up front. This is what you will get for the services. This is when your book will be released. This is what it's going to cost you. No mystery, nothing, no hidden clauses in there. And when the author agrees, we move forward. The book is published, bills are paid, and off we go.
That's good.
Okay. So we are opening the floor to questions. Who has a question? Diane Brackett. So unmute Diane and give her a go. I see you waving, Diane. So unmute and ask.
That helps. Okay. And I'm one of those eager beaver kids in the classroom, right? Me, pick me. Okay, here's my question. I am asking for a friend. Everyone says that, but indeed, I am asking for a friend to both Michaels. Michael Morrell, I really found it was interesting what you said about a lot of good novels being out there, and just sometimes they don't make the cut because the topic's just not relevant that year or just doesn't feel right. But then times can change, and then maybe the next year this topic is really relevant. So I am asking for a friend who I think is a very decent writer. You're very fond of their novel and did not take it last year. Could people reach them and just say, hey, Michael, you rejected this 2 years ago, but I do believe that the topic of XYZ is more relevant now. I've done a few tweaks to make it more pronounced. Is that an option?
Yeah, no, for sure. In fact, we get that. We do get that, and we got a couple this year. It's not so much that the topic wasn't relevant at a certain point, or that's not usually the way we work things. It's mostly that when I say to an author, well, your book is publishable. It's publishable, but we can only take a certain number of books,
Mhm.
and a certain number, let's say novels. Okay. So we have like 12 novels we're going to publish in a year. So we get 100 novels submitted to us. The first 80 to be rejected are usually fairly easy. Okay. But the next, to bring the 20, the next 20 down to 12 is the hardest part. And quite often, the 13th or 14th or 15th in the list is very publishable, but it just didn't make the top 12. It didn't make the 12 were slightly better in some way or other, or just the editor just had this feeling, because that's what happens at that level. The writing, everything is just about the same. But so how do you select those? Yeah, and you know, so when I write back, I say, yeah, I mean, you came very close. Just didn't make the top 12 or 10 or whatever, you know, for that year. And then 8 months later, I might get a letter, an email from the person saying, you sent me a very nice rejection letter last year saying, you know, that my book or my manuscript came very close to being published, but it just didn't make the last little bit. Can I resubmit if I rework it a little bit? You know, and I say, sure. I mean, we're willing to look at it again. The editorial people might be slightly different. There might be fewer manuscripts of the same type the next year. So chance, all of that is possible. Yeah. So yeah, no, we don't discourage nor encourage. It's just if someone sends us a note about it and says, you know, then I just send back, yeah, sure. I mean, you know, here's our submissions period. Send it in, and we'll have a look. We'll take a look at it. So yeah.
Yeah, I'll use our literary competitions as an example of what Michael is speaking about here, and to your question. There will be an author who will submit a suite of poetry or a short fiction piece to the competition. And as Michael said, it's easy. The first 80% is quick. Then there's that period where you have to wean it down to a certain group and a certain group. And usually for our short list, we end up with 10 with a winner. So what happens to author 11 or 12 or 13 that didn't make that short list, or even they made the short list, but they didn't win? We encourage them to take that piece, and if they feel confident about it, rework it, rewrite it, take your time, figure out where the bug was in it that didn't make it the winning piece. What was it that held it back from making the shortlist or held it back from winning? And what I've seen over the past decade plus of running these competitions is there are writers who 2 or 3 years later resubmit the same suite or the same story and end up winning the competition, simply because they figured out what the bug was in their work, got rid of the bug, and then it became a really solid piece. And so this can be the same for any manuscript, poetry or fiction or nonfiction. You know, sometimes authors can get bogged down in their writing group because they're getting too many opinions. And so all of a sudden their manuscript is mired in multiple opinions, and they need to be able to work past that and get through, you know, that morass of all of the outside, you know, thinking, and then focus on what it is they're trying to do and bring to light, bring to fruition what their intention is with that piece. And so I would think that that's the best thing that one can do. And yeah, resubmit as many times as you want. Just keep fine tuning your craft, or realize it just is no good and yeah, bury it, stick it in your drawer and start again.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Ed?
Yeah. Hi. Thank you, Michael and Michael. That's really informative what you've been presenting. I really appreciate it, both Caroline and I here. So the question I have along the lines of vanity, self-publishing, hybrid publishing is what happens, or is it possible to republish a book or manuscript that has already been self-published through the traditional lines like your guys?
Mm-hmm. It's of course it's possible. Yeah. There's nothing to stop that from happening. Except that if this might not be a problem, for Michael, but for publishing houses that depend on County Council, for example, or the Ontario Arts Council, or the book fund people, that book would not be considered eligible because it's already been published previously.
Right. Yeah, I can understand
It wouldn't be
that.
eligible for any of the awards. I'm talking about the GGs, or that sort of expensive awards. I mean, there's other types of awards, of course, but yeah. So and it's not eligible for a very important part of the funding for independent publishing houses, and that's the tax credit. The Ontario tax credit, which can, the Ontario tax credit is basically we can claim 30% of the costs of production and the distribution and publicity and promotion for an individual title. We can claim 30% and get that back as on our taxes, our corporation taxes. So that book would not be eligible for that
because it's already been published.
Exactly. Yeah, they have have these rules. There's rules about the amount of Canadian content in
it's 90% and 90% Canadian content, 90% previously unpublished.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You can publish online and that sort of thing. You can publish in a magazine. You can publish, but you can't publish in book form. It can't be like a short story. Let's say you have a collection of short stories, for example, and 3 of those 10 short stories have been published in a book form previously. That would make it ineligible for the tax credit. If those stories had been published in magazines or journals or online, that doesn't matter. But but
in a book form somewhere else.
Exactly.
Yeah. And they actually, the assessors do that. Our liaison at Ontario creates. He looks through the book. He goes to the library. He looks for everything to see if it's been previously published, and if anything more than 10% is, I'm amazed at how good this guy is at finding where a story might be. But they're very diligent about it, and they're connected to CRA, and we know CRA doesn't want to let any loopholes go by either. So, yeah, if you published it and you sold 200 books to your friend, you just shot yourself in the foot.
Okay, thank you.
That was a very good question. Thanks, Ed. Tim? Tim, yeah. Question.
Thank you. Yeah, my question actually very, very similar to Ed's, and I think Michael Morello, I think you perhaps answered it, but say you're a social media person who likes putting some of your work online, but then you find this post you've done is something you go, oh, there's something there, and you want to take that and see if you can get it published. Should you take off that social media post altogether to make sure that there's no duplication of work? No. As I think, as we said, material that is online is not considered previously published. It's not considered as part of that, the tax credit or the arts funding or the lack of they won't give you an award for. No, in fact, quite a few books have been done that way. Previously, they were blogs, for example, right? And then somebody read the blogs and said, "Wow, this would make a good book." And that's very. There's absolutely no problem with that. In terms of, I'm talking about in terms of for the funding aspect and the tax credit side of things. No, that's not a problem at all. What about contests, though?
Sorry.
What about contests? If you had, Michael C., you were mentioning you have all different short story contests and things like that. If it's a work you feel that it already has a social presence out there, but somebody's submitting it to you for a competition, is there a conflict there?
It's not an issue for us, no.
Oh.
And there's a couple of points that Michael raised. quickly going back to the self-published book, one of the reasons why we wouldn't reissue a self-published book is whoever you've already sold that book to takes a bite out of the market. So that market is no longer available for a new work. We're going to lose 100, 200 sales, whoever you sold it to out of the back of your car or out of your basement. In terms of, like Michael said, if something is available online, that could also add to good promotion for you as the author and for your story. And so if you have a story that's there online, but you're going to consider doing a collection, people already have an interest in your story and you as a writer, that's not a problem. To submit for a competition, no, it hasn't been published before. We do have a stipulation for our competitions that it's not slated for publication and it's not out with other publishers, simply because we don't want to select the story with the intention of publishing it in the magazine, because all of the winners and shortlisted usually end up in our magazine, which is part of a bonus of not just winning the competition, but you also get publication. We just want to make sure that we had the first right of refusal on a publication, but an online presence is either going to bolster and support it or be, is not going to make a difference one way or the other. So I wouldn't worry about it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sorry. Peter has a question.
I have a more practical question, and that has to do with production. Years ago, Margaret Atwood, when Power Politics came out, was immensely proud of the fact that it had the largest print run in Canada. They published 8,000 copies at the beginning, which for a poetry book in Canada is an awful lot of books. So when you fill your warehouse, Michael, with the books you produce, how do you make that determination? You're going to bring in a dozen books. You're going to bring in some new authors, some established authors. Sometimes you have a track record, sometimes you don't. You know your market. You make that instinctive choice. But how do you make decisions about the quantity you produce? Do you use on-demand publishing at all? And how do you fit an author into the market you already know? You obviously, it's not the marketing department that says, okay, we give this book a green light because we think we can sell X. That's a big house. But there has to be some consideration in your mind. Look, we not only think it's a good book, we not only want to publish it, but we actually do think we can sell it. How do you make those kinds of decisions?
Yeah, there was a point. This goes back to the MacArthur and Company days that I mentioned earlier. So that's early 2000s, late 1990s, where publishing was that world that Margaret Atwood was talking about, proud to have 8,000 books published. The reason why in the past, say, we would have done a significant print run is the more books you publish, the cheaper the unit price is. So there was a time where you had to figure, you're playing this Russian roulette almost. Do I print 500? Do I print 800? Do I print 1,000? Do I print 2,000? Because I want to take advantage of the reduced printing cost, but I don't want to have so many books that I end up with paying HarperCollins at that time X amount of dollars to store, 4,000 unsold copies of a book. What happened about 4 years ago to us is we had a very well-known writer. We went through the first 500 copies print run. We printed another 500 copies expecting continued sales, and then out of blue, which is what often happens to publishers, the returns started coming back from the stores. And then all of a sudden we ended up sitting on that second print run. And so what we have done is we follow certain guidelines that are put forth by the councils or the public funding. To receive the tax credits that Michael Marolo was saying, there's a certain requirement of X amount of copies be printed. I think it's 350 or it might be 500. With COVID, it was fluctuating around. Well, let's just say it's 500 copies that you have to print as a minimum to be eligible for the tax credits or to be eligible for inclusion in the Canada Council, Ontario Arts Council. So there is that base minimum. And what we have done now is we have gone to print on demand with our distributor, which is in Chicago, or because we print all of our books in Quebec with very cost-effective printers, I can have books printed in 5 days, very inexpensively, and they're here delivered to my house or down to our distributor within 2 weeks. And so there is no longer the requirement that you publish 8,000 books. You need to just follow your sales. And when you see you're hitting a certain threshold, then you make the determination, do I print another 50 or 100 copies of this? Or do I wait to see if the returns come back in? Because this is a whole dynamic of publishing that really is skewed against the publisher. There's nothing else I know of it like this industry, where the bookstore can take all the books they want, do whatever they want with them, and then theoretically within 12 months they're supposed to send them back to you, the returns, to get a refund on whatever it was they were supposed to do. This doesn't stop them though from returning books 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years down the road. And so that's why it always worked in a negative way to do a large print run, because you put all those books out there with the fear that they're all going to trickle in. And all of a sudden, as Michael said, we've paid all those royalties faithfully at 10%, whatever it is. When the books come back, we can't call up the author and say, hey, by the way, can you refund me on these 100 books that I paid you for? So that's the way it now works. We start off with a responsible print run, and then it's very easy to quickly reproduce the next run, or even go to a second proper run and put it, this is the second printing, second edition.
Yeah.
Michael, any other thoughts?
No, I know that's exactly what we do, and we were burnt when we first started out. We got burnt a couple of times. Indigo ordered a whole bunch of books, and we're all excited. Here we are. And so we do a second print run, and then 6 months later, that we get almost the entire batch back. So yeah, we're probably in this almost the same boat as Michael. We have a great printer in Quebec, and they it's all automated now. It's all automated. You just go online and you tell them a number of books, how many you want, where you want them shipped, and yeah, within a couple of weeks they're there. I mean, you can do it even faster. It costs a bit more if you ask for a very quick 4 or 5 day turnaround, and then you're paying a bit more. But even regular print runs, like I said, it's all automatic. You just go online, you put in the parameters of the books, and you get a date of when you're going to get it, when they're going to be delivered, and they'll ship them. They'll ship them anywhere. We have Quebec printers shipping to Chicago, IPG in Chicago, because we want to have some books down there. So the idea of the 8,000 books in one shot is no longer something that any small publisher will consider. I'm not even sure what the big publishers are doing. I'm not sure what they're doing as well. But
well, I don't suggest that's a model at all. You mentioned Indigo earlier, and obviously there's Amazon. There's been a huge change in this country from small independent bookstores to the big box stores. Right. When someone orders a book from Amazon, that obviously provides a broader reach, but does that hurt you in terms of their cut, if you will?
I think not. The cut is probably about the same as the bookstores. And as much as we hate Amazon, there are few returns from Amazon. Mm-hmm. A lot fewer, because they wait to build up their orders before they place an order. And quite often we get an email from our authors that I just went on Amazon and my book, and they're telling me my book is 3 weeks. I have to wait 3 weeks, and people are trying to order it and I can't. I say, Amazon will build up the orders, but they won't. There are very few returns. That's at least that you have that side of things, as opposed to the Indigo. Indigo is notorious for ordering a whole bunch of books, and then because they have so many stores that even if they order 3 books or 4 books for each store, you're talking about 600, 700 books right there. So they'll order that number, and then 3 books will come back from each store at the end. So yeah, I mean, and as what Michael was saying about returns, and we're the only industry that doesn't do the buyer beware thing. When you buy something, that's it. You shouldn't be able to return the damn thing. But I think that when you mentioned the fact that all the small independent bookstores have kind of shrunk away and we've got these big giants. This deal came in before the big giants came about. And I think from what I was reading, part of that, the reason for this deal was to help out the smaller bookstores. That's, and that's but that's kind of been skewed now. The big bookstores are the ones who are returning the majority of the books. I mean, McNally's will order what, 10 books at the most. They're not huge orders of books, but the Indigo will really hit you with the returns. So yeah.
And the other thing about Amazon too is they have the third-party sellers, and so even when a publisher puts a book up through Amazon will quickly drop that book if it doesn't have continuous sales, or as Michael was saying, if it can't build up a large enough bulk, then it no longer carries the book, but the third-party sellers then sell the book. And they generally keep them in stock because that's their business. They're selling all of these as a third-party vendor. Now, I'll just mention here, because I don't think a lot of writers understand exactly what publishing is about in terms of how you end up with your 10% royalty and what's involved for the publisher when it comes to sales. And this speaks to Michael's point about why some form of public funding is so important for Canadian publishers. Amazon, Indigo, whoever the retailer is, will generally take 40 to 50%. Now, mostly closer to 50%. So imagine your book is 20 bucks. Amazon takes 10, Indigo takes 10, whoever it is takes 10. IPG, since Michael and I both work with IPG in Chicago, they then ding you for 30% on the remaining 10, so $3 go to them. Then you add in you factor in your printing cost, your editorial cost, your design cost, you end up with about $1 left. And if the store sells the book for less than what it is with a discount, that $1 quickly disappears. So all of a sudden, the publisher realizes that every book we publish is losing money, and this compounds this whole bizarre situation of publishing in Canada, dealing with the bookstores. Is how can an industry survive when everything we do is inherently built in to lose money, because everyone else has their hands in our pockets. And it's why we have always said, in Exile, within our family, that, and within all the people we know in small independent presses, that really publishing this way is a matter of passion. You have to be, as Michael started off the evening, certifiably crazy to buy a small press, get into small press publishing, because the risks are inherent and they're so deep that it's very difficult to maintain a proper business model that sees you making money. So, when it comes to the big box stores, Amazon, whatever, that's just the reality behind it. And that's why when you get into negotiations with your publisher and you're looking to publish things, or to at least respect the efforts the publisher puts into it, we're really facing an uphill battle when it comes to all of these different types of things: returns, commissions, percentages, the whole thing down the line.
Yeah.
Thank you both. That's very helpful.
Darlene, did you still have a question? Take yourself off mute. You're muted.
Hi, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yay.
I had two quick questions. One of them is that okay, when a writer publishes, they end up with a certain number of books, and they have a variety of forums to sell them through. Chapters through the publisher themselves usually provides a direct link to their catalog. I had a dialogue with some writers today about what is it better to sell through Chapters, Indigo, or to sell through the publisher, and knowing that your readers are going to buy the cheapest book they can buy, and frequently the publisher's link will add the mailing cost to the book, where sometimes Chapters or the big box store will include postage, and also the big box stores have a kind of running tally of how many books you're actually selling, so that when a writer goes to pitch the next book, the publisher, the big publishers, will look at how many books you sold. And so if you were selling books through the publisher, that doesn't get recorded as.
No, you're wrong. It does
You're
get
wrong.
It does get recorded?
Yeah. It does get
Go,
recorded.
Michael.
Yeah.
Okay.
Our sales, our website sales are through Shopify. And so what happens is that every book goes back to BookNet. All the sales, the count goes right back to BookNet, which takes care. That's Canadian. They're the ones who count the number of books sold in Canada and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it does go back. It does go back. Now, when it comes to the shipping, yeah, because let me take an example that's very close to your heart, Darlene. Your book, okay? It just cost us $22 to ship your book.
It just cost me 21 book. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just realized that myself. It cost me $72 in one day to send out 3 copies.
Exactly.
Sorry, that's in Canada or?
In Canada.
Yeah.
In Canada. Because it just
It's
squeezed.
That's right.
Yes. Unbelievable.
Now, that's actually one thing that we take into consideration when we publish books is that mail slot. Can we fit that book in for $4 or $5, or are we going to fit that book in for $22? Because we did the same thing. We have an anthology that's just like 6 pages too big. $22 to ship it down an hour away from here.
Yeah.
You know, whereas the smaller books you can get away for $4 or $5. The only problem is when you ship internationally, a book that fits in the slot to the US is $12, and then internationally is $24. So if we, like all of our books online, have postage included. The reason why we include the postage within Canada with the books that fit in that slot is because we're still making much more than we would if we were selling them through Amazon. So we can eat the postal cost. But yeah, when it's a little chunkier, it's painful. There's no way around.
The other question I had, real short, there is in a standard exile contract, in fact, in all the standard contracts, even the writers union, an annual accounting, at least an annual accounting. Some even have a biannual accounting to the author for the sales. And how on earth do you do that if you're waiting on those returns?
The accounting is usually done 6 months and 6 months later. That's why it's not, if the accounting is from January 1st to December 31st, 2022, the actual statements for that will go out in June of 2023.
Ours are a minimum 12 months. And so if your book is published, we need to wait a minimum of 12 months because that's the theoretical return time from the stores. But if your book is published in a certain period, it may take 16 or 18 months before you receive your first statement. Our statements are issued on April 1st of every year, and they're calculated at December 31st from the previous year. And the reason why it takes us 4 months to issue the statement is we have to have everything certified by our accountants. This goes to other public funding things that we have to do. So we need to wait for that certification, but that's how we offset the possibility of returns. Although within our contract, there is a clause that we can withhold a certain percentage of, I think it's up to 20% on royalty payments if we're worried that there might be a big dump of books back, depending on the time. But otherwise now we're fairly comfortable with paying out after a minimum of 12 months in the market. And if we eat a small loss, oh well, that's part of the business.
Okay, thank you. I just want to say this was one of the most helpful and practical Zooms that I've watched in a year. I really found it very informative, and I bleed for you, publishers.
Great, that's
you.
great to know. So we have some questions in chat. So I've got one from Nella. What would be a normal run for a first-time publication of a novel by a new fiction writer? Does this include e-versions of books?
The first run is the same, just about the same for any writer. We don't distinguish between novice writers or because, as we were saying before, the way the printing is done these days, there's really no need to try to figure out these kinds of things. So because you can print so quickly, and ebooks are done at they need to be done at about the same time, because again, they are also eligible for tax credits. So, but they have to be done within, I forget now what the actual 6 months of the print run. 1 month. Something, it has to be at around the same time. So we do ebooks, we do EPUB now. Thank God we don't have to do Mobi and EPUB anymore. For some reason, I don't know why Amazon did it, but they dropped their Kindle proprietary thing, and EPUB now is for everything, for all the. So we do one ebook but we do ebooks only for fiction and nonfiction. We don't do them for poetry. We found out that people who read poetry books really want to have the books in their hands. And also what was happening was that the ebooks, the formatting of the poetry books, the ebooks were always getting skewed. There was always some problems with the lines and that sort of thing. So we don't do, but for a novel we automatically do an ebook at the same time. So.
Do we have any more questions from anyone? I don't see anybody. So this will be available after. We'll be posting the video probably early next week, and we'll post it on our Facebook page. So now normally we go to open mic. Do we have anyone here who has anything to read for open mic?
I have a question.
Okay, that's a good question.
Okay, just one more question, small question for both Michaels. When you send out a query or a letter or a submission to a publisher, how long do you have to wait for a reply? And if that reply takes too long, can you send that submission to another publisher?
Okay, so the response to the query is, at least on my part, and I'm famous for it, is almost automatic. Mm-hmm. The moment I get it, there's only one reason I do that, is because I'll forget if I don't respond right.
Yeah.
And then, as I think I said in some of the other previously, we have a submissions period, so that takes the month. Then we start the reading, which I tell the person when I respond to the original query I say this we'll get back to you by the end of May.
Okay.
That's depending on when the submissions period is. This year it's 1 month only, so we will be responding by end
February,
of May.
4 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but normally I would
generally ours is 3 months. We try to respond within 3 months.
Okay.
And it doesn't mean that you can't send us a query by email, because sometimes we get a little delayed. And I do receive queries from authors saying, by the way, did you receive my submission? And where is it in the process? And I'll say, okay, it's somewhere in line, and maybe give us 1 more month to get back to you. Okay.
And depending on that, so if you get rejected, are you then free to send that submission to another publisher?
Well, of course.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you're doing individual submissions, yes. If you're doing multiple, like I said, don't do it with us. You've already submitted it everywhere else.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you both. This was really, really great.
Pleasure.
Awesome. Any more questions? Not seeing anything showing up in chat. I don't think so. Okay, so normally we end with open mic. Do we have any open micers?
Well, what are the rules, Linda?
The rules are you have 5 minutes to read some of your own work. Or up
Okay.
to 5 minutes.
I can do that.
That's not for
In
us?
5. I have some.
Excellent.
All right. This is a poem called Never Too Late. Crispness against the skin, sharpness, biting, sobering, a viscous fog of steam, waves of exertion, exhaustion, pushed onwards, ever forwards, a place of sanctuary, of connection, of familiarity, soul wretched and worried, it might be too late. Ankle deep in grains of ice, shoes soaked, toes burning, bitter wind, haunted eyes, a need to repent, to repair, gasping with pained thoughts of hidden wars, broken doors. It was not me, never me, yet it always was. Alternating regret and mitigation, even if too late. A shadow on the horizon, fortress of fearlessness, a haze of nostalgia, of peace and innocence, gentle arms, soothing tones, stronger soul, stronger mind, heart screams out a child's song, brushed against the lips, the sound jaded, faded, worrisome. It must be too late. A barrage of light in the mind, joyous sound, celebration, a comforting hug, echoed again and again, blurs of smiles and a zest for peace, shy eyes, secret glances, blushing skin. Look up, kiss for the mistletoe. Where did it go? This innocence, the lack of fear, hidden by pride, by conceit, humility and civility exposed them too late. Fingers graze across a mailbox, rusted, tarnished, bent, a perfect thing of beauty. The path worn yet lovingly shoveled as with always at this time, spreading warmth, invitation, cheer, showing love to even those who didn't even love themselves. Those people are familiar, that thought you realized too late. Each step by a shaking step is taken. The body craves onward, yet the mind craves to run, drowning in a sudden release of tears, to take everything back, to be whole again, unsure. Then 2 steps, held breath, a gentle knock, a pause, an open door, a mirrored set of eyes exploring, explosion of movement, a crushing hug, echoed sobs, a sense of release. It's never too late. Thank you.
Very good. Nice.
Nice.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Bruce, Michael McNeil? Do you
I
guys have anything for us?
yeah, I got a poem.
Oh, great. Have at her.
What is the word for melancholy sadness? Is it something close to depression, to feel so profoundly unhappy, but also distant from the emotion, like your body and soul is separated by an ocean? Is this motion disassociation? When you feel so close to other and far from self, how do you stay in the moment when you're miles away from everything, yet your physical presence remains aware that you are and are not in the present? Is it wrong to be this fragile that nobody handles with care, so you hide yourself away in temporary escapes, wishing you could pull in real friends, yet also pushing them to arm's length because you're afraid of the crater they will leave when they inevitably exit stage left your life forever? As you enter stage right into the scene of here and now, I can't let anyone get too close, for when they see how easily I crack, shatter, and break, they will wake up and ditch this nightmare, leaving me with one more layer of scar tissue deeper inside hell. But I can't keep living like this either, so hollow and alone like a frightened turtle that seeks refuge in the safety of its introverted shell. Fully aware that if I don't come out one day, the gravity of this lonely will flip over, marooning me on my back, flailing to get back on track, keep moving my feet, trying to reach solid ground, crying out for help. Someone notices and reorients 180 degrees. But I'm alone inside this shell of a home. If I don't leave my comfort zone, I will never roam this beautiful beach named opportunity. I'll never see what lies beyond the tremors of fear and indecision. Inside my mind lies a waking vision, a dream that seems out of reach, so insurmountably far for a cautiously slow moving existence. Yet with these words, I feel like the hare that can run so fast to any destination, but I'm reminded by reality that I am the beached whale, flipped over turtle, feeling still alive, but hopelessly cognizant that if something, nothing short of a miracle occurs, then these dreadful days, they are painfully numbered.
Nice work. Always good work. Do I have anyone else?
You got me.
Oh,
Is anybody else in?
Yeah, I've got Peter. I caught Peter just before you, so let's go.
Okay,
Peter
let's
first.
go let Peter go.
And then you go next, Ed.
Okay, thanks.
I got two short poems that are endeavoring to solve the mysteries by asking the principles. The first one is called The Man Who Ate His Boots. It's about Franklin. Franklin was on a previous expedition before the one on which he disappeared, and his sailors became so desperate they actually had to boil their boot leather. And that's why when he came back to Britain, the British press dubbed him the man who ate his boots. There's an epigram. HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, Sir John Franklin's ships from his ill-fated 1845 expedition, were discovered in 2014 and 2016, but Franklin's grave has never been found. The Man Who Ate His Boots. I remember now. Air so chilled you could hear it breathing through the frozen shrouds, the crack of floes caressing hulls as if ships could talk to each other. Men slept, fully clothed, smoked, drank tea, cooked, read books from the library, and pretended that this was all normal. On holidays, we sang. 4 we sent home, leaving 125 men, 4 boys, a dog, and a monkey to eat 10 slaughtered oxen and the 8,000 tins. Torrington was first, then Hartnell, then Brain. We buried them sleeping in the hardscrabble earth, the voice in each of us thinking, who will bury me? They say I ate my boots on another map, and now the ice ate me. I am a secret, a scrap of paper, a myth. In the second summer, they abandoned me, abandoned hell to find hell, the masts a useless compass to snowblind men, pushing the dying boats laden with silverware, curtain rods, soaps, and the Vicar of Wakefield, desperate to find open water, desperate to find water, desperate. And the seal eaters, distant and curious to see men drop in their tracks, pushing their faces into the snow as if not to see what was happening. Our death begat a golden age of exploration. Those after me, the brave, ignorant men, collaring foxes to cheer me, seeking bounties to own me, their footsteps leaving me in this white madness to think of my wife Jane and the distant palms, uttering the same prayer. Find me, find my men. There's been a lot of discussion in the last few years about the disappearance of honeybees, a huge problem in agriculture. And I thought, well, what would the bees think? Abandonment of the bees. No single beekeeping management method could be blamed. Scientific American. Abandonment of the bees. It was not, in the end, our fault. Scarred by millennia in ghettos of dysentery, hungry for medicine, it was the parasites who stole our food and blood and broke fealty. Fearing experiments and autopsies, the workers, all women, revolted, forcing drones with stingers or expulsion. Remembering the ancient dances and weary of choosing between children and the golden sacrifice, they convinced the queen. Freedom spread like a virus, rumoring talks with the bumbles and the wilds. Scouts reported their silence, then perplexity, then alarm as colonies withdrew. Their theories were absurd. Caterpillars, mosquitoes, nicotine, cell phones, aliens, our failing memories, colony collapse disorder. It was like a ghost town, one of them said.
Nice.
That was very good. Now, Ed.
Boy, Peter, that was cool.
Yes.
Peter, when you were reading your Franklin poem, I had Stan Rogers singing the Northwest Passage in my head.
You don't want me to sing the Northwest Passage, trust me.
Okay, let's see what I got here. Okay.
I just have to leave this meeting because it's after 9. I got family obligations here. I just want to mention, if any of you, the few of you who are left, want to follow up in any way, you can email me at info@exileeditions.com.
Thank you, Michael.
The publishing or our competitions, submissions, whatever it is, info@exileeditions.com. Thanks all of you very much for participating. I'm sorry I have to go, but yeah, it's after 9. So
Thank
you
you.
very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Take
Okay,
care.
so this very short introduction, that this is a story, sort of a memoir, but I wrote it on Halloween in the full moon of Samhain. I call it The Curse. Back in the mid-aughts of this century, I was freshly quit of the ministry, marriage, and faith. Nevertheless, I remained in a more or less formal affiliation with a local congregation as what was then known as a voluntary associate minister. My role was to act as supply clergy for weddings, funerals, and the occasional Sunday service. After prior interviews regarding my suitability, the congregation welcomed me in an official recognition ceremony. In my various sermons, talks, /homilies, I made no secret of my journey away from the household of faith. It was more like a wander out the backyard, through the gate, and down the road to the left side of the mountain range. Goodbye, Christ. See you later, Jesus. I discovered that a lot of the good folks in that congregation felt the same way. Some, of course, didn't, and being good Canadian United Church folk, they said nothing but looked at me strangely and shook my hand afterwards with noticeably less enthusiasm. In the meantime, for 2 years, I heard nothing good or bad from the governing board regarding my position, performance, or expectations. It was a tidy arrangement, and because of this affiliation, I was able to keep my license to officiate weddings in the province of Ontario, and provided a significant summer supplement to my income during the summer when music lessons decreased. So imagine my surprise when I received a call one evening from a representative of the board informing me that they had decided to terminate my position. Reason? Disappointment in my lack of congregational involvement. The poor bastard who called me was obviously an uncomfortable bearer of bad tidings. I was dumbfounded, speechless. I sputtered out some indignant phrases, but apparently the board's decision was final, pending ratification from the next level of the judicatory, the presbytery. After a few minutes, we rang off. I was angry, furious at this display of arbitrary injustice. Not even the 3 strikes you're out recommended by no less an authority than the writer of Matthew's Gospel. The board had indicated nothing in those 2 years of any kind of dissatisfaction with what I was or was not doing. So I wrote the first letter. I described what happened, how I felt about it, and why. I requested a reply and a reconsideration of their decision. Kept a copy, hand-delivered it to the original to the church office, and I would describe my tone as reasonable, polite, with a hint of sarcasm. I waited for the reply. 1 week, 2, 3. 3 months passed. 5. Nothing. The news from the presbytery filtered down. They did not contact me directly, and I heard from a friend in the ministry that they had ratified the congregational board's decision. Time for letter number 2. I was less polite this time. I used words like ignorant, incompetent, unjustifiable, and chicken shit. especially chicken shit. I was not in any way hindered by Christian concepts of forgiveness and understanding or any desire whatsoever for reconciliation. So, half in jest, the other half in irony, I pronounced a curse on that church. May whatever God you believe in lay a stinking, steaming three-coiler in the middle of one of your worship services. Now, personally, I don't believe in any kind of that juju, but it felt good to express it. And this was a letter that required several overnights, like a good stew, to let its flavors mellow, mature, ferment, brew, whatever. I sent copies of it to friends of mine for review and editing, and none was needed. I wound up not sending it. I suppose better judgment prevailed. Unfortunately, I lost the only copy. Now, if this was a case of yet another story of the triumph of wisdom over folly, the story would end here. Friends would pat me on the back, congratulating me on the good choice I made. The story, however, does not end here. Oh no, it continued out of my hands. A few months later, the sweet scent of karma arrived over that part of the city block in the form of the city sewers backing up. A bit of municipal geology is helpful here. The church property was located at the bottom of a fairly steep hill, populated with mostly older residential properties supplied with mostly older supply, waste, and drain infrastructure. A sewage break in the line further up the hill would not have affected the church. The effluent would have stopped at the unfortunate's house in the middle of the hill. As it turned out, the break occurred at the bottom of the hill, thereby redirecting the downhill course of the entire street's poo juice into the church. Hilarity did not ensue. In addition to that area of the street being rendered inaccessible, the church grounds and building needed immediate and thorough assessment, evacuation, decontamination, repair, and restoration. The excremental byproduct not only hit the fan, it destroyed the kiddies' Sunday school macaroni art. Shit like that costs money. And I don't have to tell you the financial status of these kinds of religious institutions are fragile at the best of times. And they did not survive. A few painful years later, and the same ratifying judicatories deemed the congregation no longer viable and closed it. The building was decommissioned, abandoned, and demolished. All that remains is a weedy parking lot. Apparently, the deity's version of a steaming three-coiler did its work. Now, I am fully aware of the dictum that correlation does not equal causation. Nevertheless, I am quite satisfied that the correlation occurred. I did not have to send the second letter after all.
Very good. Okay, do we have any others? Marie, unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. I have a letter which is part of a collection that I wrote. It's the 11th letter of a collection of 41 letters. And it is emotionally provocative. It's entitled Bloodbath Bed. And I write under the name of Joey Red. This is a love letter, not a romantic one, but a love letter nonetheless. While you were with me, you were all of me. My being was flooded with images and auditory imaginings of you. Every inhale and exhale were for you, and every step I took was with you in mind. Even my dreams were filled with vibrantly colored images of you. You and I were meant to be. I lived solely to love you. At the same time, I was filled with wonder and terror. Would I be good enough for you? Could I give you the right kind of love? Would I provide you with all you needed? Would you be healthy? Was I mother material? In a moment of piercing pain, you were gone. I would never see your face or hear your voice. I was disgusted as the doctor was cleaning away all remnants of you. He and the nurse were debating the merits of a little red hatchback in the nearby parking lot. I would never be whole again, and they were discussing the pros and cons of compact cars. Later, I heard a nurse call the group home and ask for someone to pick me up. She reported there was nothing else they could do for me. I just needed some rest. As I walked to the car, I experienced a myriad of moods, which only a state of shock could explain. I was numb. My mind was blank, yet reeling. I was numb. My heart was so shattered, I expected my whole being to crumble any second. I was numb. My breasts were tender and tingling. I was numb. My uterus was like a hollowed egg. The slightest touch to my abdomen would cause it to crack. I was numb. My knees, ankles, and feet were cement-like and weightless at the same time. I was numb. I was lonelier than a career hermit. I was numb. I was the filthiest female in the world. I was numb. Mostly, I was weak and weary. Sleep beckoned me. I wanted to hibernate. I was hoping when I woke, I would find you still with me. Surely the last few hours were not real. I fell asleep easily, dreaming I was on my back, hovering a few centimeters over the bed. My pelvic area was submerged in a gooey substance. The goo was warm and cold all at once. I was trying to grip the goo, but it kept sliding through my fingers. I felt more exhausted and lighter as the dream continued. I welcomed the sensation, relishing going deeper and deeper into the slumber. As the dream progressed, I could hear faint murmurings. I could not decipher the voices. It was as if the goo was speaking to me, gently commanding me to float higher and higher. I came to in a room adjacent the nursery on the maternity ward. I wished I had died along with you. Every time a baby cried, my breasts would ache like a prelude to an earthquake. The doctor came to see me, explaining that he was, luckily, able to stop the hemorrhaging, but I would likely be barren. After he left, I buzzed for the nurse and tearfully asked her if there was something I could do about the pain in my breasts. She retorted, "From now on, keep your legs closed." 2 other children, and almost 10 years later, I took a trip east to that hospital. The maternity wing was no longer in use, and miraculously, I was able to walk right into the room where they placed me after you died. The only object in the room was a rocking chair. I sat in solitude, rocking for almost 20 minutes before a security guard asked me to leave. I wept as I rocked and talked aloud to you. I let go of my heart's secrets, sharing that you would always be my first love. I was desperately sorry I was not good enough for you. I blamed myself for not being able to hold you long enough. I did not deserve your forgiveness, and most importantly, I expressed my never-ending love for you. I hoped that sometime, in some way, you could meet your brother and sister. Not a day passes without me mourning you. Thank you, with all that love can give. Joey.
Wow, deeply personal. Very nice. Anyone else? I think we're good. Okay. I think this was a good night. I think we got lots of new and interesting information from our publishers and good perspective of what it's like to be on sort of your side of the desk. So thank you for that.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So our next word up is Thursday, February 9th. So stay tuned for details. Please sign up for our newsletter at wordupbarrie.com. Thank Check Energy for hosting our Zoom for us, and City of Barrie for their support. And thank you guys. Anyone who's new, you're word upper now. So thanks for coming out. And thanks to the Michaels. Thanks to Michael Morella there. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
See you next month.